If you had to choose one training method for the rest of your life, let's say the red pill was calisthenics and the blue pill is weights, which are you choosing? Drop a comment below. Now, I'm sure many of us would agree that calisthenics is much more difficult than lifting weights. This I can attest to my very own experience. But what are the primary reasons why? This is what I'll be explaining in today's video. And let me say this before we start. I highly encourage you guys to utilize both training methods as they both have amazing benefits. So be sure to incorporate both training methods. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. The first difficulty that arises when training calisthenics is body coordination and skill. When people generally think about calisthenics, they always think about push-ups, pull-ups, dips, maybe some squats, some core exercises, relatively simple exercises, right? You know, those movements require some degree of body coordination, a little bit of skill, not too much. But other than that, it's relatively simple. But when you get more into the complex exercises, like the handstands, muscle ups, handstand push-ups, front lever planche, man, the list goes on. The required coordination and skill for those moves is almost unprecedented. Not only do you need coordination and skill, but stability, balance. In that regard, when talking about calisthenics, it trumps weightlifting by far. With weightlifting, it doesn't require a good amount of skill. Some of the more complex movements like your cleans, that requires a good amount of skill. So weightlifting does come with a good amount of skill as well. But when I teach people calisthenics, and we'll use the handstand for example, if you have a good foundation of strength, meaning you can do like 50 push-ups no problem, doing an assisted handstand on a wall isn't really a problem for you, and let's say you have a good amount of core strength, going from an assisted handstand to a free handstand, it's like levels beyond that. You're gonna be able to get a handstand, let's say with that foundation of strength, we'll say it'll take you like 30 days. When I was training for handstand, I got it in exactly 30 days. I was putting in probably an hour a day. The road there wasn't as difficult. But when you're talking about going from handstand to handstand push-up, it's like going from Super Saiyan to Super Saiyan 3. Now, it won't take you a crazy amount of time to unlock your handstand push-up, but when trying to accumulate reps without breaking your handstand, that was some time. So training calisthenics can be difficult just because it requires so much body coordination. Let's dive into number 2, the level of progression. Progressing in calisthenics, it could be extremely frustrating. Sometimes it can either make or break you, and you have to be patient. It's not like lifting weights. When you're doing the bench press, all you simply have to do is load the bar. You put a 5, 25, 35, 45, and you simply just do progressive overload. Again, we talked about going from handstand to handstand push-up and accumulating reps. Training calisthenics, you gotta be a scientist. You have to be extremely creative. Now, granted, we have tools that we can use like resistance bands, weighted vests. You can be creative by putting weights on your back. The level of creativity that is required when trying to progress in calisthenics, it can be extremely frustrating. Like going from having a solid foundation of push-ups, and let's say you wanna learn a handstand push-up. You have to be creative and of course persistent. When trying to accomplish the handstand push-up, I tell guys, get strong in your pike push-ups, your wall handstand push-ups, because they have a great carryover. So you may have that foundation of strength, but stability, balance, that also plays a role. So the level of progress in calisthenics is much slower. The third point I want to dive into is body resistance. Now, when you train calisthenics, the heavier you are, the more difficulty you're going to have when training calisthenics. The lighter you are, the more success. But you can still have success even if you're heavier. When you look at those top guys on social media, they're going to be shorter, lighter in weight, shorter arms. They're built for calisthenics. But this isn't to diminish their skill set, because it still requires dedication, crazy feats of strength, flexibility, mobility, and more. When you see those heavier and taller guys doing crazy skills, man, that was probably a grind. So I personally tip my hat off to both guys, because training calisthenics is very difficult. So when you're heavier, you're gonna have a longer time trying to unlock those crazy skills. You know, when you think about a push-up, I think you're lifting about 60 to 65% of your entire body weight. But a handstand push-up, you're pressing up your entire body weight. Same thing with a pull-up. You have to pull your entire body weight. So body resistance is a critical factor when training calisthenics, and it makes it more challenging versus lifting weights. With weights, you're given the apparatus to work with, and all you have to do with the apparatus is you can add more weight to it, you can decrease the amount of weight to it, and from there you just work with what you have. And the very last difficulty I want to talk to you guys about is muscle building in calisthenics. I do find building muscle and calisthenics a bit more challenging versus lifting weights. For the last 4 to 5 years, I have been training primarily calisthenics. For about a year, I would say, I focused more on weights for my bodybuilding competition, but the body I have now consists primarily of training calisthenics. Some people might find building muscle with calisthenics a bit more challenging just because of the progressive overload that I talked about earlier. It's hard to progress in skills when training calisthenics. One of the best push-ups you can do in calisthenics is the 90-degree handstand push-up. That recruits so many different muscle fibers and will build solid lean muscle for you. The challenge and the grind to get there, it makes it very difficult. That skill alone requires so much energy. So it's no doubt you're gonna build muscle, but how many people wanna actually commit to that? It's not a lot of people. So if you have limited access with weights and you can only train in calisthenics and you reach that point where you're like, you know what, my body has capped out with training calisthenics, and you don't want to train those harder skills, then you're kind of forced to lift weights unless you find those ways to be more creative. But many guys ask this question, how do I build muscle with calisthenics? And I tell them it's more than just doing push-ups, dips, and pull-ups, and of course squats, because you got to make sure you hit your legs. That's a whole nother thing we're not talking about. Bigger legs and calisthenics, I'm gonna tell you, it's not really doable. You have to make sure you load your legs because you stand a lot. So your legs are already used to that type of energy expenditure. So if you're doing like squats, it's not gonna do too much for you. You have to make sure you load your legs with a barbell, dumbbell, some type of leg press. If you wanna grow your legs, it requires weights. You'll build lean muscle, but when it comes to building more muscle and getting bigger, it's much more difficult in calisthenics versus lifting weights. And that's a drawback of calisthenics that I pretty much don't like. That's why I told you guys earlier in the video, utilize both. It's not a matter of which one is better. I just find training calisthenics much more difficult than lifting weights, and honestly more rewarding, but that's just my personal preference. I make sure I still utilize weights. You will build muscle training calisthenics, but it all depends on how much muscle you're looking to build. You have to also make sure you're eating a lot more when training calisthenics because it demands a whole lot of energy. So be sure to eat plenty when training calisthenics, or even weights for that matter. The body I have now versus the body 4 to 5 years ago, they're so different to me. I'm much more linear and vascular now, but when I was lifting weights, my muscle bellies were a bit more fuller. And of course, I also was heavier. I think I was walking around like at 195 or so. Now I'm walking around at 182. So of course, 13 pounds, that's a big difference. But I'm still gonna say, weightlifting, it's easier to build muscle versus calisthenics. But again, guys, you let me know in the comments what you think. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, smash that like button. Most importantly, make sure you are properly subscribed. I'll see you guys next video. Peace and love as always, and ashe. Boom, we out, baby.